This program is brought to you by the following proud sponsors. The Altek Media Group, the region's leading multimedia video production and marketing company, creating powerful and innovative marketing strategies that deliver exponential returns. And by the voice of your brand, engaging your audience, clients, and employees with a signature voice that is uniquely ageless and versatile, the perfect choice for practically any project. And by Paulson Manufacturing, saving the eyes and lives of workers and first responders by manufacturing the highest quality and most reliable safety protective gear in the world. And by StudioCast Pros, engaging your audience, elevating your brand, and enhancing your profits with professional quality e-learning, webcasts, and podcasts that stand out from the competition.
Welcome to another episode of Regional Insights from California CEO Magazine, presented by the Inland Empire Regional Chamber of Commerce. I'm Jeff Allen. On this segment, it's all about the region's economy, how far it's come since the Great Recession, and where we're headed. And to talk about it, I'm joined by someone who talks about this stuff all day, every day. It's his job. He eats it, he sleeps it, he gets up with it in the middle of the night, keeps him up at night. Chris Thornburg, he's principal and founding partner at Beacon Economics. Welcome. It's nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
You bet. Last October, it was interesting. There was a story in the LA Times, and it featured some research by someone you work very, very closely with, and I'm talking about Jordan Levine, Beacon Economics. Interesting to find out that the Inland Empire was leading the state in a category that you probably couldn't have even put it in the same discussion as some of the other more interesting, I guess you might say, metro areas, Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego, San Francisco. In terms of growing new businesses after the Great Recession, an area where obviously it had been impacted in a major way. How surprising was it for you to find out in your research at Beacon that the Inland Empire was leading the state in business growth?
Not at all, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, obviously, Jordan and one of my top guys down there, and we sit down, of course, discuss our forecasts and outlooks all the time. And at one level, we understood, of course, that the cyclical effects of the Inland Empire were vicious, to say the very least. In as much as when you think about all that subprime credit and the chaos it created in the housing markets and the chaos it created in, say, retail sales, things like that, this is ground zero. A phenomenal amount of that money ended up right here in the Inland Empire and caused all those problems. But if you take a step back and recognize that at the beginning of this decade, between, say, 2000 and 2006, the Inland Empire was one of the fastest growing economies in the nation. And that growth was not being driven just by housing. Certainly was part of it. But it's also because when you think about Southern California, this is a place people want to be. People want to move to Southern California. The economy is growing, the population base is growing. And really, any kind of growth in Southern California is almost going to be, by definition, concentrated in the Inland Empire. Think of those coastal economies. You've got LA, you have Orange County, you have San Diego. Who's in the center of all that? I mean, you look west, you look south. These are the economies that are moving into this particular region. So in a sense, putting the hiatus in Southern California growth to one side, putting together away the cyclical effects of the housing market aside, it was obvious that those fundamentals were going to come roaring back as soon as the U.S. economy got moving again. And that's exactly what's happening. And oh, by the way, as much as we've seen in terms of rebounds to date, we haven't seen nothing yet. Because you're starting to see those forces intensify. And the forces for growth, the people moving again, net migration in the area, everything is turning on the upswing. And candidly, there's no reason in the world to think that the next 2-3 years are going to be so much better even than this last year.
How much does entrepreneurship have to do with the growth of new business, do you think? And certainly with respect in the Inland Empire's case, or is it more a situation where you had businesses from outside of the area relocating and open doors of brick and mortar stores and locations and those types of businesses popping up?
Right. Well, I like to divide the economy into what I would call 2 different segments. One segment is the type of jobs, the type of businesses that service the local population. The second type of businesses are those that, if you will, service the rest of the world, whether it's Arizona, Los Angeles, or China, as the case may be. From that perspective, when you think about the 2 kinds of companies that may want to locate here on one end and this end, I mean, there are entrepreneurs on both sides of those, but they're here for completely different reasons. The people on this side who are interested about servicing the local economy, they're looking at this growing population base. They're seeing increase in population. We're seeing more households. We're seeing households with higher incomes. You know, one of the things to keep in mind about the Inland Empire is every day, a huge number of people still get in their cars and drive west or drive south for work. These people, by the way, on average make more money than people who work and live in the Inland Empire. These are some of the highest income families around. That is an important client base. And whether you're a company, a large company like Amazon that wants to put a warehouse here to deliver stuff for those households, or whether you're a small guy with an idea with a new chain of restaurants or a new chain of boutique salons, you want to be here too. So I think it really, both kinds of businesses can prosper in this environment. On the other side, in terms of those external industries, yet again, it's a little bit of both. We know, of course, the importance of logistics, movement of goods through not only through the region, but through the United States. And there's a lot of big companies coming here to take advantage of that location. But again, there's also room for local guys to put their money in and build some stuff and bring it up. And of course, there's other industries as well. It's not just about logistics. Manufacturing is going to start thriving out here. You think about the places farther west, it's becoming harder and harder to run a manufacturing business in Los Angeles. It's too crowded, it's too expensive. There's room out here. And we know some of those manufacturers are going to be moving into the industry. And of course, there's all sorts of new clusters that are up and coming. We know, of course, there's some push to get some technology out here. And I don't think that should be much of a surprise. Again, the Inland Empire offers something that a lot of the more dense economies don't, which is a little bit of elbow room, a little bit of freedom to move around, and an ability to really build something, I think, from the ground up, and in such a fantastic location.
Which industries do you think are prime ready for growth, whether they're growing right now or whether they are staged and probably set to mushroom in the next year, 2 to 3 years down the line?
Well, I think honestly in the very short term, the jobs that have been coming back, which is to say logistics and a little bit of manufacturing, are going to be the big drivers. And I think the manufacturing we're talking about is not the super high-tech stuff, it's more the mid-level stuff, which by the way is flourishing in California. So that's doing great. And I think that those trends are going to continue as well. But I do think that most of the new jobs are probably going to be focused again around servicing the local population. For example, if you look from the bottom of the recession to today and you say, what are the biggest industries in terms of growth in the downturn in the recession? Well, a whole bunch of them are healthcare. Now, we know that healthcare is a booming industry. There's an enormous population out here, well over 4 million people. It's funny, the Inland Empire, in a sense, has what I would almost call an inferiority complex. They feel it's tough to be sitting against LA, the biggest county in the U.S., Orange County, the home of the money, and San Diego, this big tech hub. But if you pull the IE away from that and you look at the kind of core strengths, 4 million people, really solid household incomes, you put that anywhere else in the U.S., you're talking a major metropolis in its own right. I mean, this is a place that's almost the size of Atlanta. So and that's going to intensify because when you think about population growth, which is heating up in Southern California, the vast majority of the new population is going to be out here. And all these companies want to service that population. And I see those being the industries that are really pushing the labor force forward in the short term.
How easy or difficult is it to change course and just all of a sudden decide we want to be the new innovation hub, the new Mecca in California?
Yeah, well, I'm an economist, and they call us the dismal scientists for a reason. And that's because we like to take such rhetoric and crash it on the hard rocks of reality. Right. Everybody wants to be San Francisco. Everybody wants to be San Jose. We have a problem. We have a San Francisco and we have a San Jose. And they're probably not going to hand over that title to anybody anytime in the very near future.
Where you go with this, yeah.
So in a sense, I think that we have to take a step back. Developers love to throw that kind of terminology around. And it's just not realistic because every city out there is making the same claims and are making the same moves. They're trying to do the same things. Classic case of this would be Nevada and the Tesla battery factory. We all know about that. The big coup for Nevada was getting them to open this brand new Tesla high-tech battery factory and all the wonderful things. And wow, it seemed like the big loss to California until you actually sat down and look at what Nevada paid Tesla to put that battery factory there. They gave away the bank. That's the worst deal ever. And oh, by the way, when they decided to choose location for it, they chose it about 3 miles from the California border because they recognized that ultimately they're still going to have to be highly integrated with what's going on in the Bay Area to make that factory work. So, you know, it's more often than not, I'm a believer in taking a step back and as opposed to trying to be something you're not, really focusing on what you are and how to make that better. This is a very John Wooden-esque type of thing. You know, he was famous for saying, you know, don't let the things you can't do interfere with what you can do. And that's a classic case for local economies. The Inland Empire has enormous assets. One of them is not a giant workforce of 26-year-old PhDs. Right. It's not in the cards out here. And by the way, in general, for all the hubbub over tech and biotech and all that stuff, even today, it represents a shockingly small part of even the San Jose economy. There's small groups of high-income folks who drive the local market in secondary ways. You look across the Inland Empire and ask about some of the companies that are here, some of the things they're doing. I would suggest there's lots of great things going on out here. And it isn't necessarily the case that the IE needs to try and pretend there's something they're not. Rather, they need to focus on growing what's already developing here. Take, for example, mid-level manufacturing. Manufacturing is never going to be a big job driver, but all the secondary businesses that are attached to modern manufacturing are. And in a very real sense, to work on that kind of light industry, which is still alive and well in Southern California, who are in many ways being throttled in the context of a highly dense coastal economy, to focus on getting more of them to come out here and build up the local economy on that front. And again, going back to what I just said about the commuters. A lot of the folks who work in those office buildings and down in, farther west of here, making that drive, they're high-skilled people. In a very real sense, the area should be focusing in many ways on developing the communities that these people want to live in. Because you know, when enough of those people start moving here, eventually the businesses are going to go, well, this is crazy. 70% of my workforce is driving in from Corona.
Right.
Well, it's time to open the office in Corona. So there are ways of developing that I think that work best in terms of focusing on regional strengths, of which there are plenty here.
What do you think needs to be done in order to put together training programs, whether it be from a technical standpoint or otherwise, to get people to fill skills gaps in order to take these jobs that are either here right now or coming down the line?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing you got to recognize is there's not a lot of holes out there in terms of that skill gap. The Inland Empire is home to some great schools. And you got they got Cal State, you got the UC, you got a whole bunch of great community colleges. There's a lot of communities here with some very good school districts. So in a sense, there's already a lot of people being educated out here. I think a better question might be, well, how do we retain those folks? And again, I'm going to go back to the idea about quality of life, which I think is underestimated. You look at a place like, get down to the Southwest Riverside area. You're looking at a place like Corona or Temecula and those cities. The people who live there look a lot like people in Orange County. You look at the incomes, the education, the training. Admittedly, a lot of them get on the freeway in the morning and drive down. And in a lot of cases, those people probably previously lived in Orange County. They made a lifestyle decision. I don't want to live down here, it's too expensive, it's too crowded. I want a different type of life for my family, and they are moving into the area. That's pretty standard. I mean, most cities, you can't really think of the Inland Empire by itself from that basis because we got to understand we're an integrated economy. Right now, we're back into that mode of coastal economies are recovering, more jobs are forming, prices are heating up, people are choosing to live out here, and that's what's driving the show. We're going back to where we were a decade ago. But remember, when that keeps getting more and more intense and there's more and more jobs, and that's exactly what's going to be happening in Southern California, and the housing situation becomes that much more acute because one of the big fundamental limits on growth in Southern California is lack of housing. You are going to see jobs start to follow people up those highways. And in a sense, what developers out here should be thinking about is, okay, if I want to be the next Newport Beach, if I want to be the next West LA, what are the features of these economies that I should be focusing on? One feature is, because this is very interesting, and not to go off topic too much, but let's talk about the modern office market today. Offices in general are doing terrible out here, 25% vacancy rate. By the way, they're doing terribly pretty much everywhere. Even in like core economies like San Jose, you still have vacancy rates in office buildings in the teens. But there's suddenly a surge in permits for building new office buildings. What's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the internet has really changed the dynamics of office demand. In many ways, particularly in the suburban markets, they're getting hammered by the internet. People don't have a local suburban office, they telecommute. They just get on their computer and they work from home. But the office markets that are in dense urban areas are booming right now because there is these kind of synergies to lots of offices being around each other that the people who work there in the businesses really enjoy. And so the downtown office building in San Jose, the downtown office building in West LA, these markets are suddenly thriving. So if I'm a developer here in the Inland Empire and I'm thinking, okay, I'm thinking down the road 10 years from now, what I need to be thinking about developing is not so much, well, let's put some office buildings willy-nilly here and there. Rather, we need to be thinking about how do I build these kind of cores, these high-density job cores that will support my local economy. Classic case of this would be in Ontario. Ontario has a plan for this on the books. They have a big hunk of land they're going to start developing. It's right next to the airport. You've got highways, you've got airport, you have this center of this thriving economy. And that is exactly the kind of place where you could put in that kind of office structures and it will thrive.
So that's where the idea of mixed use and live workspaces are really starting to come to life. And so we're going to, you think there's going to be a little bit more of that as we look into the future.
So in a very real sense, you think of the affordability gap that's growing right now between the Inland Empire and the coastal economies. Right. Interesting feature on that. You know, in the course of the bubble, because subprime created so much speculative fear out here, oddly enough, that cost advantage disappeared. It was amazing how prices here went up so much more than they did along the coast.
Sure did, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But now they've come down to more normal proportions, actually went way beyond that because of all the problems in the market, but now you're starting to see it shift back again. So we're moving into a space which is what I would call more normal, and ultimately I think beneficial to the region. But in the end, housing is going to be a critical component to growth out here. And oh, by the way, I don't just mean single families. That's all nice. But along with those dense urban sort of offices, like you said, you need that mixed use stuff. You want to have the apartments. You want to have apartments people can walk to work. Because that's really kind of a new thing. But there really is this desire, particularly among young guys, young women, to be in an urban environment, to have that kind of live, play, work kind of space. And I think it behooves everybody to start working on that. And oh yeah, by the way, it takes stress off the infrastructure and it's good for the environment too.
That's why places like big cities like Washington, D.C., for example, comes to mind as one of the most desirable places for young professionals to live, is they like that closeness. They like to be able to go upstairs and crash, and then they go downstairs and they go to work at their office, and they walk next door to get their groceries for the day. It's a different situation. We're growing this way. Everybody else seems to be growing up.
I think it's a little bit of both, because don't forget, that kid's going to grow up at some point in time. When they're 32, 33, they're going to get married, they're going to have some kids, and then they want a backyard.
That's a good point.
So it's about fitting everybody into the system, if you will.
Good point. But we're not going to see the kind of housing growth in the real estate market that we saw before in the early 2000s. Really, I mean, a lot of land is gone. It is more expensive now, but Don't you think, though, that the tighter lending regulations and the restrictions there and the guidelines, it's going to make it tougher for people to get into the homes like they did before? Or you think there's still people holding on to a lot of money who are waiting for the right time to get in?
It's loosening up. Look, the Great Recession and the problem in the credit markets continue to have some repercussions on our economy today. But that's all changing. I mean, we know money's becoming easier to get. Interest rates are still low. Fannie and Freddie are loosening up. People are more confident. They have better credit records. They have jobs. They have incomes are starting to rise. So everything suggests that that's a short-term effect, not a long-term effect, and it's going to become a little bit easier. I hope we don't go back to the insanity of 2005 and 2006. We don't want to replicate that. We want to have a much more sustainable pattern of growth. But to that end, it's funny you should make that comment about space, because obviously we're here doing this talk in Moreno Valley, and I remember driving out here and looking up at those beautiful mountains with the snow and going, wow, there's a lot of elbow space out here. This is awesome. So there is still lots of space out here and lots of room for development. But again, it has to be done smart.
You know, one of the things it seems to me, I'm just thinking to myself, you know, perception has been a problem. The Inland Empire has suffered with regard to perception that other people outside the area have about the inland area. How important has that perception been in terms of holding the area back and limiting its growth from an economic standpoint? Do you think, I mean, what's your opinion about that? Do you think that there's any truth to that? Do mindsets have to be changed before the city fathers, if you will, the county leaders decide to make certain changes that are going to produce the results they want to see?
Yeah, we know marketing is important, right? We all know that. And you're right, IE has, in many ways, it has a brand problem. And some of that brand problem comes from what I think is an internal sense of insecurity, like we talked about before. Now listen, I live in LA. But I'm doing more and more work out here, and I enjoy coming out here all the time to do stuff. And to me, even for me, who studies these things, right. I at times go, wow, I'm amazed by some of the things, like little gems I discover of different hunks of this county and the beautiful things and the assets it has. In a sense, the region does need to come together and start, if you will, putting forward a more unified and candidly a more honest picture of what's happening out here. Do you have some issues with lower incomes and a little bit more blue collar? Sure. But then again, there's plenty of that in west of here as well. Right. It's a mistake to think that's all out here. Sure. And by interest imagination. And at the same time, you have some of the most wonderful assets in California, right here in the Inland Empire. And I'm talking about everything from just kind of the new, hip, growing kind of Riverside sort of scene, an underutilized but nevertheless remarkable infrastructure asset, and then on the interior airport, you're getting up into the mountains there, so whether it's San Jacinto or Big Bear, some of those glorious places to be for, you know, a weekend or a few days. There's no reason in the world that this area can't stand up and loudly proclaim, you know, Phoenix who? Give me a break. Yeah, okay, maybe we don't have the crashing waves on the ocean, but this place has pretty much anything that any southwestern city could possibly want.
So Chris, how do we change that message? How do we get the right message out? I mean, is this a matter of the cities having to kind of collaborate a little bit more with one another so that there's a buy-in from everybody involved? How do we accomplish this?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Very good friend of mine who works at Cal State LA and the Pat Brown Institute, Raphael Sonnenschein, once said to me, the biggest problem in California is we have too much democracy. And what he meant by that was we have divided our world up into so many tiny little fiefdoms, little cities all across Southern California who are so often butting heads, combating each other. And in the sense, we have lost, in many ways, the kind of potential for regional collaboration that is so important for messaging and development efforts. In a sense, everybody has to understand that the Inland Empire is an economy. And they have to work together, both in terms of their messaging, as well as in terms of the kind of development issues, whether it's building roads, building light rail, developing different sorts of things. If everybody's kind of going their own way, you're never going to get to the final destination. Mm-hmm. But if people start working together, you can really, I think, push things along that much faster, and in the end create a much better product, if you will. So it's tough, and it's across Southern California we see these problems. There's too many people, too much politics, and people are having a tough time getting on the same page. And it's tough to put away your sort of local bias, as the case may be. But we have to understand, we have to cooperate to make this thing work.
We're going to go ahead, we're going to leave it there. Chris, I want to thank you so much for taking a moment to come on out and join us, talk a little bit about the economy here in the Inland Empire, and also to invite you back to kind of continue our chat.
Absolutely, love to do it.
For Regional Insights, I'm Jeff Allen, and I'll see you next time.
This program was brought to you by the following proud sponsors: the Altek Media Group, the region's leading multimedia video production and marketing company, creating powerful and innovative marketing strategies that deliver exponential returns. And by the voice of your brand, engaging your audience, clients, and employees with a signature voice that is uniquely ageless and versatile, the perfect choice for practically any project. And by Paulson Manufacturing, saving the eyes and lives of workers and first responders by manufacturing the highest quality and most reliable safety protective gear in the world. And by StudioCast Pros, engaging your audience, elevating your brand, and enhancing your profits with professional quality e-learning, webcasts, and podcasts that stand out from the competition.